down the national debt a little bit at a time. Perhaps that may have been true at one point, but now we're up against a wall. Our rapidly aging population is going to put an enormous amount of stress on national finances in the years ahead. According to the U.S. Representative Frank Wolf, interest on the national debt plus, quote, mandatory spending on programs such as Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid will surpass the total amount of federal revenue by the 2025. So, what does that mean? The interest, just the interest on the national debt plus mandatory spending on programs, which includes Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, just the spending on those alone will surpass all federal revenue brought in. So all taxes brought in by the federal government by the year 2025. That's before anything is spent on defense, paying federal workers, Homeland Security, bridges, roads, anything. Just on Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, and the interest on the debt. Even now, though, things are a giant mess. We're told that deficits are under control, but it's a massive hoax based on accounting gimmicks. During the fiscal year 2014, the national debt increased by more than $1 trillion. That's not under control, that's a raging crisis. Many believe that we can improve the situation by raising taxes. And yes, a little more could probably be squeezed out of the people, but the impact on government finances would be negligible. Since the end of World War II, the amount of tax revenue taken in by the federal government has fluctuated in range between 15 and 20% of GDP. That's a gross domestic product, which is every single financial transaction in the country, the amount of all goods bought and sold within the United States in an entire year. Gross domestic product. Everything bought and sold for an entire year by everybody. No matter what tax rates have been. 15 to 20% on average. I believe it's possible to get up into the low 20s, but that would be very damaging to our economy, and the American public would probably throw a huge temper tantrum. Honestly, I think the amount of government intervention and spending as part of GDP is probably much higher than that now, especially if you took into account quantitative easing. I mean, you can't print $85 billion a month for 4 or 5 years at a time and buy up assets out of the economy without it having some sort of massive effect. You just can't do it. So the real problem comes down to spending. During the past 2 decades, spending in the federal government has grown 63% more rapidly than inflation. And mandatory spending on programs such as Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid has actually doubled after adjustment for inflation. We simply cannot afford to keep spending like this. And then there's a matter of interest on the national debt. For the moment, the rest of the world is lending us gigantic mountains of money at ridiculously low interest rates. We've covered this. You guys, I'm not going to get into it. Making sure I'm still live here. Okay. Got to find my place again. However, if the average rate of interest on the U.S. government debt was just to return to long-term average, we would be spending more than $1 trillion a year just in interest on the national debt. That's if the interest rate on our treasury bonds that people buy from us, that we agree to pay interest on, if those were to go back up to a normal or average interest rate rather than essentially zero, we'd be spending more than $1 trillion a year on interest alone on the national debt. And that's staggering when you consider that the entire budget for the United States is right around $4 trillion total. That's all federal revenue brought in combined, including deficits, borrowing from the Federal Reserve. Meanwhile, the only place that interest rates on U.S. government debt have to go is up, and our population is going to keep getting older and more dependent. Our overall debt continues to spiral out of control as well. According to CNBC, the total amount of debt Americans owe has reached a staggering $58.7 trillion. This is, considering household debt. Not even national debt, but if you consider household debt of people, their cars. What do you owe on your car? Everyone takes out a loan now, finances it through a bank. They're extending these loans out for 1% interest for 86 months now, I think I saw, for a new truck. It was ridiculous. It's like borderline a decade you're going to finance a truck in Lewis Branch. The total debt measure is not to be confused with 18.2 trillion national debt, which is 102% of GDP and is a subset of the total figure. So as we discussed, there's not enough money in our entire system to even pay off a significant chunk of that debt. A reason is it's given, including George Bush. And hey, we got a connection back. We're back live again. This is going to be terrible for editing later, too. Normally, this just automatically uploads to the website, and we can put together a good audio file for you, but we're going to have to do some editing, just like we did last week. Anyways, talking about the national debt and how it's mathematically impossible to pay off. And you know what? It's true. Even if you don't take in unfunded liabilities, just the national debt that we owe, just as a nation, the $18.2 trillion as of a year ago, I think it's exceeded $19 trillion now. Johnny Zero was saying in the Warfighter Eye right before this, in the last 6 months alone, our national debt has jumped over $1 trillion. So, say we're at $19 trillion, which is about $1 trillion more than 18.2, which was 102% of GDP. If you guys remember back a few weeks ago, we were talking about Japan. Japan is going crazy with their debt right now, and they're considered one of the most volatile markets and most likely for economic collapse here in the near future because they have like a crazy 240% debt to GDP ratio. It's like a debt to income ratio for your bank when you're looking to get approved for a mortgage, right? And what are they doing? We talked last week that the Japanese central bank was a top 10 shareholder in over 90% of Japanese companies, propping up their economy. And then we've been talking about the IMF calling for negative interest rates. The IMF, chief investment officers at the IMF, all over the nation, all over the world, mind you, there's all these bankers calling for negative interest rates. In this article, they were talking how interest rates have nowhere to go but up. Wrong. Negative interest rates. All you need to know is it's bad. We're going to continually take on more and more debt. 100% of GDP ratio in debt is the warning signs of economic insolvency. We are insolvent. We cannot pay our debt. It is mathematically, physically impossible to pay off. Even if we confiscated every single dollar of every financial transaction spent on every product produced, sold, or bought in the United States for an entire year and put that straight towards principal on the debt, we couldn't pay it off. I mean, I don't even know what to say. I mean, the whole situation has gotten to be so mind-numbingly absurd. I mean, it's where do you go from here? This is why I encourage people, if you have the money, if you have money in your bank account, take it out of the bank if you can. Keep as much money physically on hand, cash, as you can. Leave as little in the bank as possible just to pay your bills and do the bare essentials, and then keep everything else liquid on your person in a safe at home, whatever. But keep it out of the bank, because like we've talked about previously as well, when things start getting a lot more crazy in the financial markets here in the States, cash controls are going to start coming, and we've already seen it. In the Eurozone, what are they doing? They're limiting withdrawal amounts. Start slow, but then one day it's going to come where nobody can get to the bank, or there's people lined up for 3 blocks trying to get in the bank, withdraw all their money, close down to their accounts, and they're not allowed to. Don't be that guy. Cash controls are coming, withdrawal amounts, and they're going to pose it as some sort of other event other than just an all-out economic crisis. That's my guess. They're going to do as much as possible to reduce panic, to show that they've lost all control financially, and there's nothing that can happen. And hell, I mean, at that point, your money might not even be worth anything anyways. So it might not be worth having cash. But in the meantime, the best thing you can do, take your money out of your savings accounts because you're not making anything anyways. Keep it at home. That way you're not caught with your pants down. And then take some of that money and go to a coin store, jewelry store, find one that sells silver and gold. And I'm serious. Buy some silver. You can buy junk silver, the coins, the little dimes and quarters that pre-65 or whatever it is that have silver in them. Just keep those on hand. Buy a whole bag. Buy $1,000 worth at a time. Whatever. Small denominations. The silver will retain its value, and if the price of the dollar crashes or dollar itself becomes worthless, the price of that silver is going to go up, and you're going to maintain the value of your investment. It's probably the easiest thing to insulate. Other than that, I'd be buying food, storable food, water, bullets, and ways to protect your family and keep away people who are trying to take what you have. And I know that's a lot of doom and gloom sounding. It sounds like crazy, end of the world type stuff. But look what's happening in Venezuela right now. We've talked about how Venezuela is going bankrupt. I mean, it's getting crazy there. There's no food in the supermarkets. People are looting. There's riots everywhere. It's real. It happens. But we'll take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about Venezuela and what's going on down there. So stick with us here on the Warfighter Up Radio Network.
Programming that you know and you trust. Johnny Zero, the Honey Badger, Reality Check, The Hoo-Ah Show, Cindy and the Warfighter Family, Drop Zone America, The Drive with DT, and of course, Thirsty Thursday with me. Keep it dialed in on Warfighter Up Radio.
Another way.